is, I guess, related to all the papacy stuff. So what? Because there's everybody in the chat is asking about what. How do you resolve this supposed error? How do you resolve this supposed error? So I guess it's going to kind of have an underlying question about your view of um, the degree of safety that the papacy has, because you have at least in the popular sphere of hyper papalists and then like uh, rad trads, rad trads. You kind of have a unique view of the safety of the pontiff's teaching.
Hmm.
So would you, I guess, kind of just quickly explain that?
Yeah. So it's something that I've not written on yet. So I've written in critique of other views, and so that kind of puts me in the position of sitting in the audience and finding holes in somebody's arguments. But as soon as somebody says, "Hey, here's the chalkboard, Mr. Ybarra, come up here and show us how it works," I have not even begun to do something like that.
Hmm.
Um, but what I could tell you is this: that from my own study on the papacy in the first millennium, uh, what I would like to be able to do is to hold that a pope could never be a heretic.
Hmm.
That's what I would like to do. I would like to hold that position, meaning the position of Suarez and Bellarmine, who said that it was entirely unfitting for God to permit a validly elected Roman pontiff to defect in faith at all.
Hmm.
And because in the first millennium, that's just how the evidence comes across when we look at the papal claims. They're not thinking in terms of conditions and whether things are ex cathedra or other kinds of conditions for different modalities. They're just, the See of Rome can't be tainted. Full
Hmm.
stop. Period. Well, that that is a bold claim, especially when they say, well, the Roman See cannot be tainted like the other sees have been tainted. Well, that gets us into a different realm now, because how did the other sees taint themselves? Like Alexandria, you know, how did Constantinople stain itself? Was it through some special um, pontifical ex cathedra modality? Or was it just they got up and they gave an episcopal utterance that they're holding to something that deviates from the apostolic faith? And we all know that it could even be less than that. Like Nestorius was preaching sermons, right?
Hmm.
Um, so for them to say that the Roman See cannot be stained, their view had to be quite extensive on what that meant, on how far that protection goes.
Hmm.
And so, I want to preface, or make a preliminary comment that my heart wishes it could go in that direction. However, I do see that in our magisterial texts, and I'm not speaking about in the last 200 years, but in the last 2,000 years, I do think that the sixth, seventh, eighth councils do tell us that a pope can uh, err in a way in his magisterial promulgation in a way that it constitutes what they understood as heresy.
Hmm.
Now, what makes this very difficult is that in the second millennium, and this is not just like as if it came out of nowhere. In the second millennium, there are some things in the first millennium that you could use to synthesize a peculiar definition of heresy. But let me just, for some, to make things simple, in the second millennium, people start to, especially in the canonist tradition, they start to speak of heresy with different degrees, different senses, in different ways.
Hmm.
So material heresy versus formal heresy is just one example, right? So formal heresy takes the sum of matter and form. And so, unless you have both of those things, we're not going to launch accusations of formal heresy. But in the first millennium, they're calling people heresy if they could just find a private note that was sent from one
Yeah.
person to
Yeah.
another, and even if it's 100 years after that person died, everybody's got their swords out, calling that person a heretic. So the situation of Honorius, for example, Vigilius, Liberius, uh, there are ecclesiastical writers who say that these men met the conditions for heresy. What did they understand by the term is difficult to say. I would say that they give no delineated reason for why they would make that accusation different than they would as it was towards Nestorius or
Mhm.
Eutychius or Arius. So could the Pope be a formal heretic? Uh, you've got a lot of evidence in the first millennium that says he can't, but you've got some deep evidence in a few instances, not many instances, but a few instances that seem to it sets the record straight for me that they did believe that the Pope could promulgate a heresy in his official capacity.
Mm.
So where does that put me today? Well, I obviously want the magisterium to be as safe as possible. Who in the world is going to want to say, well, I kind of want to see that it's not as safe?
Yeah.
That's ridiculous. We all want it to be as safe as possible. But what stands in the way for me holding to what today is understood as the objectivist safety of magisterial utterances, where there can't be the material of heresy or error in a something that would contradict essential Christian teaching. What stands in the way, of course, is those few instances that reach a high level of representation in the first millennium. So uh, I don't know how to synthesize it all. I'm still in the process
Mhm.
of but what I can tell you is, um, like many people used to hear me on Reason and Theology, and if they read my blog, um, the reductionism that goes on in the traditional world has no parallelism in first millennium Christianity.
Mhm.
And so I definitely want to sympathize with those who are for the magisterial safety theory in terms of the object of the text. But I kind of side with John Joy here. If
Mhm.
anybody's familiar with John Joy, he and I have had discussions on this, and we've looked into the sources on the Fifth Council and the Sixth Council in relation to Vigilius and Honorius, and I'm led to believe that for the time being, Vatican I seems to say that infallibility is reserved for certain modes. When it's the Pope speaking, it's ex cathedra, or when he's uttering something in the universal ordinary sense. Um, but besides that, in his ordinary teaching, and if he's not reiterating something that's part of the content of the universal ordinary magisterium, he could err to the extremity that it contradicts a required teaching. Now, people can disagree with that, but I would say that it needs to be clarified for us even better than it is already. I know some people think it's already been taught at Vatican One. I just had somebody on my channel, Emmett O'Regan, who was defending that view, and I I don't think it's clear, at least clear enough to put a dark cloud over me yet.
So just to clarify for everybody, the reason I distinguished Eric from rad trad territory is that Eric still believes that no matter what, there's a certain subjective safety. to assenting to what the Pope teaches. So you can't say things like, "Oh, if you believe what Pope Francis is preaching here in good faith, that you're gonna somehow lose the virtue of faith from that assent."